Let's get started. Welcome, everybody, to this quarter's edition of Masters of Measurement. Hi, my name is John Stewart. I'm the EVP of Customer Success and Analytics at Upwave. And today, we're going to be talking about performance branding. So over the next hour or so, we're going to have a lively discussion about what performance branding is, what makes it different from passive branding, how it plays into the growth of branding and brand measurement, and some key takeaways on how you can put a performance lens on your brand investments. As a reminder, the Q&A is live. There's a Q&A button down at the bottom. And with that, it is my privilege to introduce our Masters of Measurement. We have Allison Sprague, Head of Ad Measurement for Wondery, Jenna Johansson, Partnerships Manager, LG Ad Solutions, and Travis O'Neill, VP of Product at GumGum. Thank you for bringing your expertise to us today. And I want to get started by asking each of you kind of a warm-up question to set the stage here. And so the idea is that it is quite often stated that the entire point of advertising is to drive sales. Do you agree? And if yes, why? If no, what other goals are there? So let's just go down the line. Let's start with you, Jenna.
All right, cool. So, in my opinion, every business has a core heartbeat, and that's the need to drive sales. And this primary goal is pretty much undeniable, but it's crucial to acknowledge that sales aren't the sole purpose, and brands also have to cultivate meaningful connections with the audiences. And by focusing on this personalization, brands can influence perceptions, foster loyalty, and gain market share. And today, in today's competitive landscape, consumers actually value what brands' values are, and it's super important for brands to communicate authentically. Marketers can ensure long-term success in the competitive market when they find the perfect balance between sales goals and relationship building. And lastly, a main question marketers should be asking themselves, in addition to how can I make my media work smarter and harder, is our advertising effectively making the necessary connections as the user travels throughout the sales funnel?
Absolutely. Travis, what about in your experience?
I think Jenna nailed it on the head there. Crudely speaking, yeah, I think advertising generally is about driving sales, but not every individual campaign has that as its primary objective. There's a lot of different objectives that take place over the course of a life cycle with a consumer. And we need to be paying attention to all those different touch points that influence decisions along the way. But broadly speaking, the reason people advertise is to drive more sales generally, but we have to make sure that we're paying attention to the full funnel.
Yeah, absolutely. Allison, want to weigh in here?
Yeah, I agree with both of my peers here that, obviously advertising's end goal should be about driving sales for the business. But, as Travis mentioned, it doesn't mean that each campaign should have a sales or conversion related goal. So as my peers have mentioned here, earning sales is a process. So depending on the brand or the product, consumers need to be aware of it, familiar with it, think positively of the brand before purchasing it. And, these outcomes often happen over time and campaign by campaign. So while sales may be the ultimate goal, these campaign level goals that help you get to those sales numbers can often be more upper funnel and brand related metrics.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny, we here at Upwave sometimes we get even verging on snarky type of comment because we are a brand measurement analytics platform, and people say, well, serious advertisers will plan, buy, and measure success via sales, implying that maybe brand isn't so serious. So the way we've been thinking about this concept for a while, and in the way that we're thinking about it is there are two kind of distinct business functions, exactly the way that you guys are saying. There's generating future demand, and then there's capturing existing demand. And so what that means is direct response marketing or performance marketing, which is kind of a label we don't love, but we do acknowledge that what that is doing is capturing existing demand, and brand building generates the future demand. So the analogy that we like to use as a simple example is to think of it like an apple orchard, right? So direct response marketing is picking apples that already exist. And obviously, this is a critical activity. Without that, you don't get apples, right? But if all you do with your time and money is pick those apples, then you're not going to generate more apples year over year. Trees die, right? And so you'd also, in this imaginary apple orchard, you'd need to plant these trees. And if you don't plant today, then you can't pick tomorrow. So this is what we think of as brand building. But taking that one step further, how do you pick the best seeds, the best soil, the best nutrients, monitor your levels, get feedback, data feedback loops, understand weather patterns. So when you're doing these things, in order to get to the best apple tree, that's performance branding. And so we're kind of seeing the market come around to this idea. Even famously conversions-oriented business like Airbnb is kind of saying, that even in the pandemic, they had to cut some of their direct response, channels like search, and later moving to a branding strategy that's delivering results for them. So I think lastly, before we kind of get into some of the Q&A here, what I think is on everybody's mind here is, well, how is performance branding really different from what you may already be doing? And we think that this is where the intersection of measurement comes in, right? So historically, brand building and brand measurement has been seen as this nice to have, right? Maybe if the ultimate goal is to drive sales, but the assumption or the assertion there is that it's fluffy, luxurious, and not too analytical. We actually believe performance branding is the opposite. It brings the same analytical rigor, optimization, and the systematic approach of lower funnel campaigns to the upper funnel. So with that, let's get into some questions here. So I think I would like to ask each of you that what is your experience and what are you hearing from brands today? Are you hearing that, maybe there's been a transformation of brand measurement or analytics as it pertains to brand measurement transform over the course of your career? Or, do you think things, the more they change, the more they stay the same?
I'll jump in. I think it's changed tremendously since I started my career. I remember running brand lift studies that had pop-up questions and were not very scientific, and there was no audience understanding. You were just kind of like getting yes, no's, and you really didn't know where they came from. And the technology that's available to us now to understand the audiences in a much more scientific and systematic way is so much richer than it ever was in the past. And we're seeing on our end at GumGum that a lot more clients are starting to invest more time in this. We're getting a lot more thoughtful questions and a lot more thoughtful setup when we run brand studies or any kind of outcome study. A lot of times before, it used to just kind of be more of a checkbox, like, oh, we ran the study and it went up, I guess. And that was kind of the end of the conversation. It was just like everyone was happy. And now there's a lot more digging into the data, really understanding, well, what audience did this resonate the most with? And you kind of get into those cuts of data that we were never able to do when we were nice little pop-up surveys that we were running 10 years ago or something. So I think on our end at GumGum, like internally, we've been using this data a lot more to build better campaigns, build better strategies. And we're seeing the same thing from our clients too.
I completely agree with you, Travis. I would say when I first started, it was like the pop-up surveys. We were measuring things like boxes and banners. And today, everything is just so much more sophisticated. And what I'm really seeing is also something you touched on earlier, but tracking customer interactions throughout all of the various touch points to attribute conversions and attribution throughout. And there's a growing emphasis on like experimenting and being agile, which is super evident with the adoption of incrementality testing, which is something that I'm really seeing as we enter 2024. And I think this really reflects a commitment to data-driven optimization and decision-making in the process, and just the need to have integration between all the various different data points in order to have that unified view of the audience and get those data cuts that are helpful to inform the targeting strategy.
Yeah, same here. And I started my career in radio, and measurement was fairly limited at the time. It was the time before radio companies had digital apps, and we were just starting to adopt digital apps and understand how to measure reach and engagement and outcomes for audio at the time. And so through my career, I've really seen two main changes. The first is this shift from delivery-based goals to outcomes-based goals. So, when I first started in radio, a lot of the goals were around impressions, reach, frequency, cost per thousand, GRPs. And now, obviously, there's a much stronger emphasis on outcomes. And I think with that emphasis on outcomes, as my peers here have mentioned, is a higher level of education and understanding from our advertisers and our customers and an expectation, as they should have, to hold their media companies accountable to helping them understand and measure their outcomes. And then kind of the second big shift is this ability to measure the outcomes and the ability to use those measurement tactics to actually optimize. And I think that's really the crux of today's conversation, obviously, is how do we actually use that information to optimize brand metrics towards performance. And I think those have been two big shifts I've seen.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think there is a temptation here to kind of think, oh, well, maybe what we're really talking about when we're talking about the growth of brand is what's changed with TV. And I think even 5 years ago, CTV was still seen as sort of a digital kind of direct response where, we've seen the rise of CTV, all the different forms of video that are aiding in branding. And so maybe let's start there. So in your experience, and, I think, Jenna, let's start with you. Let's start with the CTV expert. Is CTV treated differently than, in your experience, than linear TV in terms of the expectations?
Yeah, so while I don't have a background in linear TV, my experience at LG Ad Solutions obviously has given me a ton of insight into CTV. And CTV provides an interactive and measurable, keyword measurable, ad experience that just never existed on linear TV. Linear TV was hugely effective for like capturing the attention of viewers at scale, but didn't offer measurability. And like you said, digital video solved the measurement problem, but didn't have the scale of linear TV. And with CTV, we get a blend of both, and we're able to have a real-time feedback loop with measurement, which enables marketers to optimize their campaigns towards the tactics that are achieving the most efficient ROI and the highest engagement rates. And this has really driven up marketers' expectations within a single campaign. And there is an expectation that some type of user engagement is happening either after seeing the ad or when seeing the ad. There's metrics like video completion rate that are available on CTV. They're nearly 100% on this platform, just highlighting the engaging nature of it in and of itself. And then there's new metrics, always shaking things up, like attention and co-viewing. And this continues to shift the landscape and increase marketers' expectations as well. And then lastly, there's things like QR codes and location and weather-triggered messaging that are really low lift and easy to create. There's a lower barrier to entry. Like every brand doesn't need to have $7 million to spend on a Super Bowl ad, but with CTV, it can offer accessibility, scale, and measurability.
That's awesome. I mean, we're At GumGum, we have traditionally run in open web environments, but recently we moved into CTV within about the last year or so. And a lot of what you said is stuff that we're seeing too, where there's some parallels between what's measurable in open web and what's measurable in CTV, but then there's some things that are totally different. Like when we're talking about the web, like it or hate it, CTR is still something that often is attributed to campaigns performance, but that doesn't exist in a CTV environment. Yeah, there's QR codes or some kind of engagement that you could have on some like interactive ads, but that's a scan or an interactivity on a CTV ad is not the same thing as a click-through rate. The viewability that we see is 100% or essentially 100% on CTV, where it can range from 30 to 70% to 80% depending on the format that you're running in web. But one of the things that's kind of stayed true is our ability to run studies in web versus CTV. And so as we've rolled out this new product, we become so reliant on the data that we can get from running these performance branding campaigns to understand how it is actually doing. Otherwise, again, when we're stuck, like Allison said, just measuring impressions or what was our reach. And we want to be able to provide so much more information to our clients and to ourselves as we're trying to launch a product to make sure that this is doing what we think it's doing and driving the effect that we think it's going to have. So this kind of performance branding, I think, is so crucial, especially in CTV, where the signals are just different than what we get when we run a campaign on the web.
Yeah, I'm glad Travis mentioned the different signals, because while my background isn't in CTV, I am seeing a lot of parallels between linear and CTV and linear and digital audio. And the different signals that we get from each of them is one of those differences, right? So obviously the ability now to target audiences on digital audio is a benefit to advertisers, and to reach those consumers in a contextually relevant environment is obviously a benefit to advertisers, and as well as the measurement. The question and the challenge, I think, to us as we move forward in this environment with both linear and broadcast media and digital media coming together, because while broadcast media has declined, it's still a significant portion of reach. I think the challenge is, how do we measure these two media together, given the different signals and given the different potentially performance outcome objectives, right? So linear may have different objectives than digital. So a lot of similarities between the streaming TV growth and journey as to what I'm seeing as well in the audio space.
Yeah. I like what you guys are saying around the connection points to, different outcomes, different metrics. I think that the parallel between TV, linear TV, and other types of TV is reach. It's foundational. I think efficient reach is also a very important metric. The extent to which you can reach your target audience with the dollars you have. And then, from there, potentially where things diverge is the ability, to more quickly adjust media plans, think about incremental reach, and then using reach as a diagnostic for performance, right? If my campaign didn't perform the way I wanted it to, why is that? Well, it's 9 times out of 10, either creative or it's that we didn't actually reach the people that we intended to. And I think there's also the ability to more quickly, move and be nimble with CTV channels. But, with linear TV, also an opportunity, to either plan in advance with the upfronts or dip into the scatter. So, slightly different flavors of the same sort of thing, which is cool. So I think we just found ourselves talking, sort of getting into a conversation around channel, which kind of brings up a question that, if we're thinking about media optimization, is it really just typically reserved for certain components of the buy, right? So we talked about performance branding, but actually optimizing, so bringing signals from the campaign, making adjustments to the media plan in flight, shifting impressions around. Is that really just a programmatic thing, or is that is that for different channels as well? Jenna,
I can start with that.
or
Yeah,
Allison? Sure.
yeah, I mean, I define optimization as obtaining data-driven insights to move media around to improve your performance outcomes. And that can happen through any number of different mechanisms. In podcasting, there's really three mechanisms that we use for optimization. One of them is content, the second is audience, and the third is message. So in content, we can optimize towards genre or contextual relevance using brand suitability tools, and also media type. So there's audio only podcasts, there's video podcasts, there's live events where podcast hosts are going and meeting with the consumers and their listeners and fans. Under audience, obviously, through podcasting and through our audience network, we have thousands of different audience segments that we can optimize towards. And then through message, we could look at ad length. We could look at price message versus product focused message. And then more recently, we've been looking at things like sonic elements, so tone, background sound effects, and background audio. So I think to your question, John, I don't think that optimization is only for programmatic buys or only for certain media. I think if you are using data to drive media decisions to improve your outcomes, that is the definition of optimization. You absolutely can do that with podcasting and streaming audio, and I'm assuming as well with CTV and the other digital media as well.
I really like how you define the definition of optimizations, and I completely agree with that. I think maybe in the past, it was reserved for programmatic buys, but in the way we run campaigns, we're optimizing at all times based on a mixture of first party and third party. And I think this is demonstrated really well in a recent case study we did with a major tax prep provider, because we used our automatic content recognition technology, which is ACR. So that's our viewership data at the glass level. And we created custom ad exposure segments to basically suppress and eliminate any households that were previously exposed to this brand's linear TV ads. And we were also able to create segments to target competitor ad viewers. So there we're using our first party levers to create different audiences. We paired that with third party demographic data, so another layer for optimizations. And while we had a sustained CTV video presence throughout the flight across our FAST channels and app partner network, we also activated a 12-hour native roadblock. So this really commands share of voice and allows the viewer, like the advertiser, to own that living room experience. And we did this during a major national sporting event. And lastly, we partnered with our friends at Upwave for brand impact measurement. So with this campaign, we saw impressive results. We saw a 300% increase in CTR efficiency, over 8 million unique households reached, and a 4 percentage point increase in brand favorability. And what this is really highlighting is a variety of different KPIs. So we have, driving that unique reach. We have the brand impact metrics and all the different targeting. And throughout the campaign, we're constantly pulling different levers, not only between that, in addition to the different media types, like Allison was mentioning. It's not only reserved for just, like creative, but it could also be, the media types itself.
One of the things, Jen, I heard you mentioning earlier that we're seeing success with on our end is you mentioned attention earlier. I'd love to know a little bit more about how you are using attention as an optimization technique with performance branding or any other kind of campaign that you guys are running.
Yeah, so attention's definitely a bit of a newer metric for us. So it's something we're constantly learning about and evolving. We've seen it come up with a couple of different third-party providers. We just actually we have a big contract with Nielsen, so we'll be able to use co-viewing and attention metrics moving forward in our measurement. So it's something that's been like an extremely hot topic and is top of mind for our advertisers, and trying to find the best way to kind of make it work with our strategy. So it's very new to us and we're learning.
Awesome.
Yeah, I love sort of, Jenna, what you're saying about there are so many tools out there and creative tools to reach audiences to be effective in your reach. There's a lot of measurement tools, but at the same time, it goes back to what Allison, you're saying, that essentially it comes down to content, creative, and audience elements, right? And so it can get really complicated in how you can tactically execute on these things. But at the end of the day, it's very simple. You're trying to drive an outcome. Let's say that outcome is, possibly more awareness or consideration of your brand. And then you've essentially got three ways that you can approach it. But then so many tools underneath those. So, and growing, right?
It's amazing to see that while so many advertiser objectives have shifted as we kicked off the conversation, media has shifted, advertiser objectives have shifted, but ultimately the ability to optimize and which levers you can pull to optimize are mostly the same, right? So, the mechanism through which you optimize, how frequently you can optimize, whether or not that optimization is measurable, that's all shifted. But ultimately, those are the three things that advertisers have always optimized towards: which content should I run in, which audience should I reach, and with which message. So I think that's a really, interesting journey to see that we've evolved as we have, and yet maybe we haven't evolved all that much.
Well, so Allison, some of the things you were saying, the framework you provided, you said, well, in audio, we have these things, but to me, they can be used across, any channel. But I guess in your experience, I'm interested to know, is streaming audio treated differently? And what measurement challenges do you think you've faced as it's sort of evolving as a channel?
Yeah, it is treated differently. It's interesting to see a lot of our partners have, audio specific budgets. So I think in that sense, I see audio treated differently. There are a lot of agencies now that have audio specific teams. We have heads of audio that we're working with. Advertisers are a lot more aware and familiar with audio as a channel. And I think one of the challenges that we see in podcasting is that it's a fairly new medium. So, you think of podcasting really growing in the last 3 to 5 years at the most. And in podcasts' infancy, there really were no measurement options. We didn't have mobile ad IDs. We didn't have cookies. We weren't able to just plug into the existing measurement landscape. And so we had to work with measurement partners to build things like IP address into their identity graphs and their identity resolution solutions to enable podcast measurement. And that really only happened in the last couple of years. So it's still very much in its infancy. We're growing and evolving and figuring out how to better measure podcasting, but super excited to be able to work with partners like Upwave, who are helping us innovate, right? So for example, we have dynamic ads in podcasting, but we also have host read ads that are actually stitched into the content. And these types of ads aren't measurable through traditional digital pixels and things like that. And so with, working with Upwave, we've been able to build a direct data integration with you all. And now we measure the content as the ads. And I think that's been, an innovation in the podcasting space. So very much just beginning our journey and looking forward to seeing what's next.
Yeah. So in your opinion, what do you think it's going to take for, podcasts and audio to, I guess, rise above the experimental phase or being treated differently phase, and it just becomes part and parcel with a multi-channel plan?
Not sure I'm the full expert on all of that or necessarily the deciding voice, but for sure I'm starting to see a shift at least in terms of measurement capabilities. At this point, podcasts are pretty much at parity with any other digital media. We can measure brand lift, web lift, offline traffic lift. We can optimize towards the objectives and outcomes, just like any other digital media channel. So in terms of measurement, I think we've arrived. We are at parity in terms of budgets and how our advertising partners think of audio. It comes down to the media partners being accountable to their performance, right? I mean, we are in the trenches with our customers, trying to dive deeply into their data and help them understand how to optimize and get the most out of this channel.
Yeah, I think that's I would completely agree with that. Maybe it just needs, because something like CTV not so long ago was in the same boat. It was new, maybe a little bit experimental, and the measurement tools became, parity with others, if not better. And then the reach and the targets were there, and so maybe that's all it takes to evolve. Um, so we've been focused a lot on the tactics so far, and maybe sort of the channel, the technology aspect of things. But maybe if we kind of shift our focus a little bit, because I also think that there's potentially an organizational challenge to this idea of performance branding. And what I mean by that is, for so long, brand measurement lived in the research team, which typically meant sort of a different purpose for the measurement. And without being too presumptuous, maybe brand measurement was a one-off project that would happen once or twice a year, and the focus being on the end of campaign report and what you could learn. Um, in your experience, do you think that there has been a cultural shift where brand performance maybe is now living within the media or investment teams, as opposed to the research team? Or do you think there's a coming together? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I can comment first. Basically, I agree. I think that in the past, these two teams kind of operated in different silos, that the budgets were separate and they weren't speaking to each other. But like we started this presentation, we're here because of sales. And at the end of the day, that's the goal. But the way that these two teams are judging success along that journey are just different. But ultimately, it's to continue to drive revenue. So these teams with that common goal are more and more working together, especially as we're tracking all the consumer touch points throughout the journey. Oftentimes these journeys cross paths with each other, and the metrics, all relate and impact the strategy. And I think with campaigns, we've all kind of discussed managing multiple KPIs and having all of these different KPIs that we're constantly optimizing toward. It's important for these two teams to be in synergy. But I think it also extends beyond just these two teams. And we're seeing a shift where, at least on my side, we're having to involve, data analysts, our product team, always speaking with our product and engineering teams. We're constantly evolving. So I think maybe in the past, it was sort of this not side project. I don't want to frame it like that, but it's becoming more and more of a focus, and is something that's like on the roadmap for the company as a whole.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think the big part of it is the real-time nature of the data now requires us to have people that are hands on keyboard optimizing this in real time with, with the partners that they're working with. You can't just wait until the end of the campaign to go, well, how'd it do? That doesn't work anymore. Now there is obviously still a lot of analysis that needs to go. There's macro analysis across platforms and across partners and stuff. And so you still need those research teams. They still serve a function, I think. But everybody in the organization, I think both on the partner side, but also within our organization itself, needs to be aligned and understanding what's available to us when, and really working very closely together. And being on that I'm on product, we are also very closely involved in this process as well, and always looking for what else we can do to enrich the opportunities we have to optimize on the data that's available to us now from Upwave and others. So I think it is a much more inclusive part of the process in any organization that's doing any kind of branding, performance branding.
Yeah, I agree. And I've loved to see the shift and the evolution from the customer's side as well. So obviously from the publisher side and the media provider side, we are, involving a team of, cross product experts, and but to see on the client side, and one of my favorite things is joining a call when we have the account team and data scientists and analysts and product folks from the agency all coming together. And I mentioned earlier that there's an audio team, but oftentimes at agencies, there's not an audio data science team. So that's the opportunity that we have to talk with the folks that are seeing the cross-channel measurement solutions and results. And so that's definitely an evolution that I've enjoyed seeing. And I think that's most effective when our customers are involving teams from across their organization to understand how to use this information from a creative optimization lens and a media optimization lens.
Yeah, I think one of the things you said there is that I've seen interesting on the client side is I think there's a lot more curiosity about what you can get from us and from Upwave and other partners like that than we ever had before. Again, there used to be kind of more of this checkbox, kind of like you run the study and then you see what happens kind of thing. And I think more people are so much more interested in, well, what can the data actually do for me now? And I think they're asking a lot more really insightful questions than we've ever seen before. And I think that's really exciting for all four of us anyways.
Yeah, what you all are very optimistic, and I appreciate that. I think maybe performance branding is in its awkward teenage years right now. And the reason I say that is because there's a lot of demand for the brand lift, the incremental people you're going to drive to be aware, consider. There's a lot of demand for that to be held accountable, right? And the media partners to be held accountable for that metric. And sometimes when we get that question, well, why didn't this perform? We would ask, well, what did you optimize? And the answer you get is, well, clicks or views or whatever. And so this idea that I love where it's going, right? We want to drive and maximize the brand outcomes. I think there's just a little bit of work need to be done to get there, and an understanding that if you're going to use a retargeting tactic, you're not going to drive incremental awareness. Those people already know about the brand, right? Or if you're going to use clicks, like that's probably not going to work for much of anything. So I do think there's a current challenge and an opportunity to bring these teams together and really sort of understand what the objective of the campaign is and design them and not try to have a one size fits all. So that's really interesting. And I think the other thing is we're talking about organizations and people. The other way to look at it is how media and media partners are sold through, right? So in your experience, I'm really curious. Do you have a performance narrative when your sales team is out, selling your branding products? And if not, what is the story, right?
I think we're growing in that direction. We've always done pretty well from just a traditional branding perspective. We tend to drive lifts in awareness and recall, and so that's always been pretty core to our story. And as we're able to do more of this outcome optimization and build in new levers and features to enhance that even further, is where we're really trying to drive our story. Are we there all the way yet? Probably not, but I think it's a journey that we're taking, and we are, especially on the product end, constantly trying to keep shifting us in that direction. We know that clients want to see more in terms of outcome measurement. They don't just want to see the CTR. They don't just want the clicks. They want to really understand, well, what did this actually do for my brand? And so I think this is something that we are still in the process of growing into, but one that my company is very excited about and believes that believes in the power that we can get to by continuing to focus in this area.
At Wondery, we don't have a brand versus performance narrative. So our marketing narrative, our pitch deck, I guess, if you want to call it that, is the why buy Wondery, why Wondery is a good investment for advertisers. Those core takeaways are the same regardless of what your outcomes are, your goals are. Obviously, there are different sections of that narrative that become more relevant for certain types of advertisers, but it's not like a narrative that's put together where we say, this is our narrative that we give to our performance advertisers, and this is the narrative we give to our brand advertisers. It's, look, this is Wondery. This is what we can do for your brand, for your performance. And it's interesting too, because while we're talking about performance branding, it's been really interesting to see that we have brand advertisers asking us for performance-like measurement. So they want us to measure sales and conversion on their website. And then we have, historically direct response advertisers who are all about, conversion using promo codes, things like that, who are now asking us for brand measurement. So we're hearing this term brandformance, and so it's this evolution where both of them are kind of overlapping. So we try not to go to market with, different narratives for each, because I think each of those goals may change throughout an advertiser's life cycle with us, but we do obviously ask for an advertiser's objectives and would position different solutions and recommendations based on those objectives.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Allison. We don't, the end goal of, like our media kit and all of that is the same. The story is the same. I would say our sales team has to take a very customized approach when meeting with clients because of all the reasons we're talking about and different outcomes there are to measure. We want them to define, hopefully, a primary KPI in that bundle of all of the KPIs. But we also need to be very consultative in our approach to understand what their goals are and make adjustments and suggestions accordingly. So it's hard to, there's not a different narrative for each, and oftentimes it's all looped up into one.
Excellent. Okay, well, I have one last question for you all before we get into the Q&A. We've got a couple of questions in there from the chat, so thank you. I think what all of this amounts to is one basic question for those, for the uninitiated, which is, what can a performance marketer begin to consider or start doing now to ensure that they're getting the best value from their brand building investment? So I guess taking my persona of the person who's just optimizing to clicks but wanting more awareness or more consideration, in your opinion, what can they start doing today?
I would say it relates back to selecting a primary objective, but also, as I've mentioned, having different strategies throughout the plan. So just thinking about our media and entertainment clients, for example, there's different lines with targeting, app installers, lapsed users, active users, all different kinds of audiences that we can reach. And each of those should have a primary objective associated with it. So if we can get really collaborative in the sales process and as we work together, and being open to experiment and have these transparent discussions, and actually put the optimizations we're suggesting into place. Because, oftentimes we have these discussions and suggestions, but they can't be made in the campaign for whatever reason. So actually being open and willing to try it out with us, because we're all learning really together.
Yeah, I love that Jenna mentioned the word transparency, because what I was going to say to this is to hold your media companies accountable, use them as your partner, make sure that you're being transparent with them around what your goals are, and ask them for their suggestions. We've obviously run thousands of campaigns. We have a handful of learnings and best practices, and we should absolutely be using those to kick your campaign off on the best foot. So I would say use your media partners as your partner, hold them accountable, and work with them to help plan and optimize your media.
I would second all that was just said. And I'd encourage them to stay curious. I mean, especially people who have been in this industry for a long time, they might not be aware of some of the new technologies and things that are available to them in terms of how they could optimize for this. And so, they've set it and forget it on CTR for the last 10 years. And, they remember running pop-up brand studies back in the day. Like it's very new and there's a lot of new things that they can do. And so I would encourage them to ask Upwave or other study partners, what capabilities exist now that I didn't know that existed before? And same to all the partners that they're working with. What capabilities do you have to optimize on this data? And how can we get the best outcome for my campaign? So stay curious, ask the right questions, and keep an open mind as to how this has changed over the last 5-10 years.
Yeah, I think that's a great segue into a couple of the questions that we got. One of the questions is, which maybe I should have talked about earlier, an attendee is asking us to describe in more detail what the measurable performance KPIs are for a branding campaign. And so I can answer this one at a high level. What we're really talking about are upper funnel metrics. So things like, is your campaign driving people to become more aware of a campaign? So could they pick it from a list and be aware of the brand within the category? Narrowing the funnel, would they consider or intend to purchase that brand or products from that brand? So these are all attitudinal measures. And essentially the way that we look at it is a narrowing of the consideration set. So this works even with high purchase rate like CPG. If you go to the shelf, you've got to be aware, would consider a product to be able to notice it among a slew of other competitors in the category. If it's a low purchase rate, like an automobile or a credit card or something, then would you consider it? Do you know the features and benefits of those things before you kind of go to make a decision? And then it could even be things about, do you remember what the brand stands for? So the certain attributes, or do you remember specific messages that you can associate with that brand? So those would be all the branding metrics. And the way to understand if you're getting a return from those metrics is, obviously we measure incremental lift. You can take it one step further to measure, to add a cost to it, to know how efficiently you're moving people to, what is the cost per person lifted to awareness or consideration. So those would be the examples. But then a follow-on question, which I'll kick to the group here, is, Allison, you had mentioned some of the historical brand metrics, right? Like impressions, reach, et cetera. And then Jenna, you talked about case study metrics for some of your CTV offering. But can each of you kind of share what metrics you would recommend, or you are maybe by default leaning on for performance branding, maybe across channels? So maybe, and I probably have to say this, is there a one size fits all, right?
I don't think there's a one size fits all. Jenna mentioned earlier, identifying the single most important KPI, and I'll add at the campaign level. So we talked about always the end goal is always sales. But what is the single KPI that you want to drive for this campaign that's going to help you get to those goals? For some, that's growing awareness. If you have low awareness, you're not going to sell your product. For some, they have high awareness. They have an affinity issue, and it's more about driving favorability and affinity and positive, positive sentiment around the brand. And for others, it's driving things like consideration. So those are really the three metrics that we've been looking at: awareness, favorability, consideration. Those are typically the three, depending on the life cycle and the stage where the brand is. And then, what we do is what we encourage our advertisers to do is to, especially if they have media on throughout the year. So if it's always on media, we'll have the study also always on, and we'll take a look at a monthly basis and see how each of these metrics is being impacted by the campaign. We'll optimize and we'll move. And so I think demonstrating the value of performance branding is really being able to go into the data and identify how those KPIs are trending over time.
I think you're muted, Jenna.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. That's out of habit. But I would say it's those three metrics that we're mainly focused on, and all of those metrics impact the end of the user journey, sales. So what someone thinks or perceives about a brand in relation to competitors, especially if the brand has high awareness. It really depends on what the goals and objectives are. There's no like one size fits all. Like these are the KPIs I would suggest you measure. Actually, I don't like getting that question because I want it to be more of a conversation. When someone is asking me, I want to understand what the goals are. Did you recently launch a new product? Like what are we trying to achieve here, so that I can help kind of tailor the questions, the KPIs, and the measurement towards these goals. But these are, the upper funnel metrics for performance branding are things like awareness, favorability. Another one is the attributes, which is really interesting. I really like to dig into insights there, but it really varies.
The one other thing I would add there too is I think the audience, the target audience, is really important to take into consideration here as well. I'm allergic to cats. The fact that I know the Meow Mix song does not help Meow Mix at all. And so making sure that you're measuring these kind of things, but also measuring it across the audience that you're actually trying to reach, I think is really important as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think probably if I would summarize everything you guys were saying and everything I believe, it's you have to understand the needs of your brand, right? So are a lot of people aware of it? If not, you might not want to focus a whole lot on trying to drive super, down funnel or nuanced metrics like, the attributes. You just want to simplify things. And then I think conversely, right? If you're Verizon or somebody, Coca-Cola, like how much money are you going to need to spend to get the last 0.5% of awareness? Like you just, you're not going to do it, right? So obviously a brand, these are extreme examples, but a brand like that is going to be a little bit focused on down funnel metrics. And then the other thing is just like you were saying, among the target audience. So a big question we get all the time is, hey, what if I have short-term brand lift, but my brand tracker isn't moving? Many times it's because you're making a lot of people aware, but not among your intended target. You know, so I think those are sort of the two rules of thumb, but Jenna, you hit the nail on the head. It's a conversation. You have to, explore what's happening with the media, where is the brand, and so forth. I think one other thing that's interesting is we got a question of like, hey, what if my organization is tied to sales or short-term metrics? How can I change the minds? How can I fight the battle to get culturally movement towards brand metrics? And I guess I'll start by saying the way not to do it is to get brand lift measurement on a campaign and then expect the results to start to change minds. That's doing it backwards. You actually have to believe that your goal is a brand KPI, then try to maximize that KPI. But I'll kick it to the group here to see if y'all have any thoughts on changing the hearts and minds of maybe a CMO that just is totally focused on sales and not the brand.
I mean, I think something that can be done is, especially when looking at perception metrics, like let's say the conversion metrics are lagging and they're trying to figure out why is this happening. Brand impact can be really helpful because it can show like, hey, among our target audience, like the perception actually isn't great. Brand favorability isn't favoring us. It's favoring our competitors. Maybe we need to target, the competitors and take market share away from that. Like, pairing the two together can provide insight into the target audience and how they're behaving. And it can be useful, although changing minds is often very difficult.
I agree with Jenna. I think you may or may not be able to change the minds of the folks that are making those decisions, but I do think that using brand measurement, even alongside your conversion measurement, can help you identify the why. So to Jenna's point, it's not just, did the campaign work? Did it not? Why is it effective? With which audience is it most effective? And so in this case, you might use brand measurement to help optimize, to give you more context as to why your campaign is or isn't performing well, and to identify opportunities to drive conversion.
Yeah. Okay, we've got a great question on a tactical question. So recognizing that all of you have, you work at platforms that have great capabilities in terms of contextual targeting. How do you think the power of contextual targeting is changing with everything going on with identity, right? With cookie and made deprecation, et cetera.
Well, we've been focused on contextual for a really long time, even before the cookie was crumbling, or I don't know, I guess we have till next year now with Google, but it's always been a core focus for us. And one of the things that we believe is making sure that you're getting that message in the right moment. And you can achieve that through really advanced contextual targeting. What we do both in the web and in our CTV environment is make sure that the ad makes sense to the content that's being consumed at that time. So if I'm reading an article about golf, I can get that Titleist golf ball ad instead of the Meow Mix ad, which wouldn't make any sense there. I'm not ready to buy Meow Mix. I'm never ready to buy Meow Mix. But it's the same way we've seen, even going back to print, I'm not going to see that Meow Mix ad in my Golf Digest. I'm going to see the Titleist ad there, and then I guess Cat Fancy, that still exists. Then I'd get the Meow Mix ad there. So it's something that we've known for a really long time. And so it's something that we've spent a lot of time making sure that we're able to really deliver that experience across every channel that we activate on, because we think it's so important. And we see that really boost performance regardless of the KPI that you're measuring.
I would
Yeah.
say that instead of contextual targeting, we're focused on viewership targeting. So while we're not running contextually aligned with specific programs or networks, the way that we would target is viewers of specific content, programs, networks, gaming, anything that a user does on the glass is part of our ACR technology for viewership targeting. So that's really where our strength lies.
And I'll say that podcasts were born cookieless, so we're not facing as many concerns with regard to our ability to segment audiences because none of our audiences use cookie or maids to identify those audiences. But I will say that podcasts are by nature very contextual. They're easy to contextually target. From a genre perspective, for example, a home security brand might do really well in a true crime podcast. But it's interesting because we actually sometimes see the opposite, where it's really like a beauty brand that does really well in true crime, and it's the opposite of what you would expect. But that's the idea of performance branding, is measuring those outcomes and optimizing to them. But we also work with third-party solutions, which transcribe all of our episodes, and we're able to actually search historical backlogs of episodes, and we're able to search for keywords, brands that the hosts have mentioned through time, content that the hosts have mentioned through time. We had a case where a snack brand, a really healthy snack brand, was interested in advertising with us, and we found that one of our shows had consistently talked about this particular snack brand for the last several years, and so we connected with the host. So it's usually a genre based contextual targeting, but there are opportunities as we're expanding to ingest additional signals to improve that even further.
That's another space, just like performance branding, where contextual has come a long way. One of the things that we're working on right now is even mood detection. So yes, this is a scene outdoors, but is it a scary scene outdoors? Are you getting chased by someone, or is it like a happy romantic scene outdoors? And being able to bring that mood to the moment too is showing some really positive signs as well. So there's a lot of advancements that have been made in the contextual space too.
So in some ways, it all goes back to good old-fashioned media planning, right? Pairing the right content with the right ad, and just you could do it so much better and faster with the tools available nowadays. Okay, well, we are at time, and I wanted to thank each of you for really bringing it today, and thanks for everyone attending and bringing the questions. So thanks for another great Masters.